Hello and welcome to another segment of IPPFA TV. I'm your host, James McNamee, president of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. And with me today is Cliff Young. Cliff is the national president of North American on ISOPS. Am I pronouncing that right? I'm always terrible with my pronunciations. But Cliff Young is also a native to Elgin, Illinois. So he is somebody that we like. He's one of our native sons. You went to Elgin High School, if I'm not mistaken.
I went to
Grew up
Larkin.
Oh, Larkin. Okay, I got Larkin. Yes, you're a West Ender.
Yeah,
For those
yeah.
who don't know the difference. So he grew up out this way, and you do now live out in Washington D.C., if I'm not mistaken. And
Yes, I do.
yeah, not only that, but Cliff has also written a book. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. We'll let Cliff talk about that book a little bit. But we're here today to just kind of get a handle on where the country's going, because Cliff is one of the leading premier opinion pollers in the United States. And public opinion polling is not what some people just think it's done a certain way, but it's a science, is it not, Cliff?
We like to think of it as a science, but yes, indeed, it is a science. There's a science behind how we find you, how we select you. We're pretty consistent at that. But yeah, I did, I think, 20 years of schooling to be able to learn how to select a sample and make sure it's robust and it represents what Americans think.
And right now, because with all the politics going on, we've got all these elections coming up with primaries and so on. Your firm and some others are relied upon by these politicians to help them formulate policy. Is that not correct? Am I reading that correctly?
And that's correct. And so we work with decision makers. Those decision makers can be parties and politicians, worried about the next election, making sure you have a winning message. How do you convince people to vote for you? Decision makers can be heads of industry and business. We help them navigate an uncertain world. We help governments as well. How do you optimize your policy, your service delivery? We work a lot with federal, state, and local governments in their engagement with citizens. So we work with decision makers in general. Obviously, right now, we're really focused on the midterms, the upcoming midterms, um, uh, and what they really entail for decision makers. There's a lot of interest, by the way, not just here in the US, there's a lot of interest around the world in these midterms, because obviously the United States is a very important country when it comes to global politics.
And of course, your firm is international. You're just not in the United States. You're international. You're doing opinion polling throughout Europe, the United Kingdom, Canada, and elsewhere. And you help governments create policies reflecting what the public is looking at things going forward. I think the number one issue, and it is always stated, is the economy, correct?
Yeah, its economy is sort of writ large in general. If you peel away the onion, James, it's really affordability this year. It's the ability to
Correct.
make ends meet. I mean, obviously in 2024, Donald Trump and the Republicans won on that issue. The Democrats suffered because of that issue. Right now, they own it, and they're responsible for improving affordability. When you do focus groups with people, they really talk about the difficulty of just sort of month to month making the bills work. We have to understand that when inflation happens and the inflation rate goes down, the cost of living doesn't go away. It's still it lingers in terms of high levels and the inability or the difficulty of people making once again ends meet. So that's the central focus of this electoral cycle. And right now, the issue and the issues and the issue more specifically, affordability favors the Democrats and not the Republicans.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I mean, housing costs, it's difficult to buy a house. Mortgage rates are still high, and then housing, inventory is low. So it's still rough for somebody to go out there and buy their first home. I don't want to take a trip to the past, but I remember when I was starting out as a policeman, a young cop, and it was during the Carter years. And my God, the interest rate assumptions for treasuries were at 16%. Mortgages were at 16%. It was insane. And we didn't get to that point, thank God, because that was really rough. That was a rough time. Um, but we're still in what I consider to be murky waters. I think one of the issues, also besides the economy, that's scaring people, and I know you've done kind of polling on this, is AI. The issue of AI impacting the job market. Have you seen that in your polls where people are very concerned with AI?
Yeah, they're not thinking about it, day to day, moment to moment. No, once again, they're worried about those bread and butter issues that are immediate to them: affordability, children, school, taking doctor's bills, those sorts of very pragmatic things. But when you ask Americans about AI, they have mixed opinions, right? On the one hand, they understand the importance of technology. Technology is a wonderful thing. It makes the world go round. It's made their lives easier. So there's this positive view of it, but they're also scared of it. There's a lot of trepidation or angst about it. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about AI's effect on the future of their children. So I would say overall, there's a degree of if not pessimism, worry about it. We haven't necessarily seen it affect directly politics, right? It hasn't hit that is AI transformations have not hit the labor market so squarely right now. But what we are seeing is an uptick among the young of unemployment, especially the educated young or younger Americans who are educated. That is the target that's most affected by AI right now. A lot of the implementation of it on the business side is with those lower level, entry level positions. You don't need 3 or 4 or 10 individuals. You can have that if you're using the technology. So again, Americans love it and hate it. They're not worried about it centrally today, but it's on the horizon and it is a worry.
Now, another worry out there, obviously, is the issue of destabilization in the world.
Mm.
And we obviously have the war in Ukraine, and it's been grinding down. And that war is like something out of World War II. It is just horrific. We had the situation in Gaza. And then we have all this other areas of flashpoints from Taiwan to all sorts of other areas that really could draw us into something. Is the public that you're seeing concerned that we could be drawn into a very bloody mess somewhere down the road?
Yeah, they're not. Once again, that's not a constant and a constantly high concern. Sort of, let's call it foreign policy and foreign policy interventions. Americans don't like it today. They're much more skittish than they were 20 years ago. Let's say after 9/11, they went through the forever wars. That's kind of burdened in Americans' minds. They don't want to be stuck in quagmires like that. So when you look at conflicts like Gaza or Ukraine or even Venezuela, there's support. There's support in general, but not for being involved and not for putting boots on the ground. But again, Americans are not like worried about that day to day. That said, if you take surveys of CEOs and decision makers, the number one concern today is just uncertainty, and more specifically, interlocking uncertainty. Like all these different possibilities, could a conflict, explode in the Taiwan, and then you have Ukraine, and all of a sudden you have issues. Yeah, you have issues with AI and so on and so forth. So among decision makers, there's a higher level of angst and worry because there's so much uncertainty. There's a lot less stability. Or indeed, we see that in how companies are investing today. They're not investing as much. They're being a little bit more careful on the margins. That's why the economy is a little bit more. There's a straitjacket a bit around it. So no, the average American, he or she's worried about those bread and butter issues, domestic issues. They don't want to be involved in foreign wars. Elite, high level decision makers, yes, are worried, and they see that as part of a very uncertain world.
So the average American doesn't really, have skin in the game. They see what the issue with supporting NATO or not supporting NATO. The average American is strictly focused more internally, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, like if they just need to need to make the family go, right? And they need to pay the bills and those sorts of things. They're only worried about foreign conflicts when they sort of appear front and center. When we get involved, when we put troops in harm's way, they're worried about that. And so, and that isn't just today. That's been the history of public opinion. Public opinion is worried about, those day-to-day, more mundane issues of making a life go, making the family go, and only become worried about foreign policy issues or national security issues during acute moments. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, the attack on the Twin Towers as examples, putting troops on the ground in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They become very worried and focused then. But unless you have that sort of engagement, they're just going to be worried about those day-to-day things.
So another quick thing, we heard the courts ruled this morning about the tariffs being, overruled. Is there a lot of support within the United States towards our courts, or has that eroded within the last few years?
Yeah, relative to the other branches, that is the executive branch and legislative branch or Congress, the Supreme Court is in better stead. In other words, they have higher levels of trust among Americans, but that's declined as well. Political institutions in general have lost credibility over time, over the last, let's say, two generations or 30 years or so. The Supreme Court less so, but still the Supreme Court today is seen as much more politicized than it once was. That's why I think the decision, whatever you think of the decision, let's set aside, the fact that it was a 6-3 decision was important. I think Roberts really wanted to show a majority support for the decision, not that like slim majority of 5-4. But no, the Supreme Court has suffered like all institutions today in the United States.
And of course, that's all based on a lot of it is social media has really come into play and is really pushing a lot of different agendas out there. Has law enforcement in general come back up in the public's opinion of them? And we're talking about your local law enforcement, the people out there who are keeping the communities safe. Is the public, we suffered tremendously a few years back, and now it at least in my gauge, my own personal gauge, it seems to have gotten a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, there was that kind of acute moment during COVID, post George Floyd, where favorability towards the police dipped, right? But that said, the police, firefighters, first responders, the military, they're all seen as service professions. And by definition, in Americans' minds, service professions are special, they're important. Americans are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because you're doing something for the community, you're doing something for the collective. So yes, there was a dip. It's come back. It's come back a bit. The most recent numbers are 2025, and I think we're basically at a status quo ante before George Floyd at a national level. But that said, relative to all other professions and relative to all other people, places, and things in the United States, the police are in a relatively good position. Why? As I said before, it's a service profession. People recognize that.
So let's get to your book. You just recently wrote a book. Now, are you the only author of that book, or do you have a co-author with
I
you
have
in the book?
I have a co-author. Thank you. First, the book is called Nativist Nation, and I'll explain what it is in more detail. But my co-author is Kirby Godell. He's a professor at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas.
So, Nativist Nation. Just by the title, I'm assuming it's kind of identity of the United States and how we look at ourselves. Can you give me a little bit more about the book, and then where would we be able to get this book in the end too?
Yeah. And so the book is really about it's a step back, and it's looking at the big picture, right? This is a book about the broad social forces that are shaping our world, not just the United States, but globally. Really to explain why we're seeing what we're seeing when it comes to politics, when it comes to economics. Why do we have a president that was pushing forward tariffs, for instance? Why do we have strife in Europe, let's say, across a whole host of different issues? And the book is an attempt to do that. Now, we're not trying to explain everything. What we really focused on is something we call nativism. And to define it, it's basically nativism is favoring native born over foreign born. It's really a way of looking at the world of like who deserves to belong to Club America or not. It's really about national identity and what national identity means for politics, for the ability to come to consensus or not come to consensus, because that is our issue today. And what we find ultimately is that nativism has always been with us here in the United States. It just sort of ebbs and flows. And so in the 1840s, with the wave of Irish coming over, it became very acute. People were questioning what it was to be an American. Then at the turn of the century, when you have the Italians and other European large waves coming over of immigrants, you ultimately have Americans and everyone questioning what it means to be an American. And we're in the same moment today as well. We are at the, in terms of immigration levels, we're at the same level as we were in 1900. By the way, so is Europe. Europe's at the same level, about 15% foreign born. And that creates tensions, right? And the focus of the book is specifically on that, to make sense of what's going on, make sense of sort of our world a bit. And ultimately, our argument is nativism is the most important force in politics today, both in the United States and globally. And to understand politics, we have to understand it specifically. The last point I want to make about it is that you know it comes down to identity. It's very visceral. Nativists tend to be more restrictive in how they think about being an American. An American needs to be born here. They need to speak English. They probably should be white. They probably should be Christian. There's a little bit of variability there, but they're more restrictive. A non-nativist would say, yes, that's important, but what's really important is that you hold the same values as I do as an American. Like you believe that it's about pulling yourself up by your bootstrap. You believe equal protection before the law. These sort of more civic values, right? And our conflict today is about that. And I'll give you one sort of I think example. Just imagine a girl. Let's call her Jane, and she came to the United States when she was 2. She's not here legally. But she speaks fluent English. She went to school at school here. She's a Cubs fan and she's a Bears fan. She loves them. The nativists would say no, she's not an American because she doesn't have that slip of paper. Her parents like jumped the line. She has to go back in the queue and start over again. I'm being extreme here, obviously. And the non-nativist would say no, she's actually is culturally American. She's just like us. She just doesn't have a slip of paper. And so that's kind of the tension we see today. I'm using it as a metaphor to explain it. And the last point I wanted to make is, and this is kind of where we're at with the book, is like we just didn't want to describe the forces at work or at play, but we wanted to talk about solutions looking forward, right? We believe that these things are solvable, right? That solution, and we pulled a lot on it at Ipsos, testing it. And there is a middle ground when it comes to immigration. Most Americans agree that we need strong borders. Most Americans agree that we need a police body to defend those borders, but they need to be well trained. But most people believe it has to be done in, that is deportation in a humane way. Some should be able to say, maybe some need to be deported. And finally, looking forward, the immigration law has to make sense, even if it's more restrictive. And so there's fertile ground there for a compromise. Not saying that will happen necessarily. You need leadership for that. But at least from a public opinion standpoint, the nativists and non-nativists kind of share some beliefs in common, and there's common ground, at least from a public opinion standpoint, to carve out things. So that's a little bit long-winded, but ultimately that's the book in a nutshell. You can get it on Amazon.com, but I appreciate you allowing me time to explain it.
No, and believe you me, I'm a student of history, and me and you, Cliff, we've talked many times about history, and I'm all Irish, so I mean, like, the tree doesn't have any branches with me. I did my DNA tested. I'm 99% Irish, so I looked at if you look at our historical roots when we came over, nobody liked us, the Irish. We had the same problems. But if you look at some things, I always say the Irish and the Mexicans are mirrors of one another. We have our St. Patrick's Day, we wave our little flags. They do the same thing. It's all the same thing, and it's all one big party. And it's only the identity that you left, not the identity that you've absorbed. Because remember, a simulation is the most important part of making immigration work, is a simulation and stuff like that. I think Europe is, in my opinion, has its problems because they've never had an assimilation society. The United States has, Europe has not. I believe the United Kingdom has a little bit more of that because of the way they've been throughout the world, but the rest of Europe is facing a crisis with it, and it's they're having some trouble. And again, that's just a layman's opinion from me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes total sense, and yeah, America has a muscle for integration, for assimilation, as you said. It's maybe not so well worked right now, but it's there, and we see it going on in many different places. Ultimately, there needs to be, though, a common sense plan that takes in consideration the worries of the nativists and the anxieties of the non-nativists, and no one will be 100% happy. But like when you poll on the respective issues, treating those that are here in an undocumented or illegal way, with humanity, and due process, closing the borders, because you need to close the borders, you need to have strong borders. You ultimately You need to have some sort of path forward for some, and so on and so forth. There's high levels of agreement, like 80 to 90%. So I'm hopeful. Actually, for me, it's a glass half full, not half empty. Immigration is a policy lever that you could tweak, right? If we're all about populism or authoritarianism or some of these other things that are often talked about and pointed towards, when thinking about our politics today, what are the solutions or the policy levers to resolve those things? It's very difficult. But if the problem is centrally about nativism, about who belongs and doesn't, and that's sort of the facilitator of what we're seeing in today's world, there are solutions looking forward.
No, I believe there are. I mean, we ended up in a crisis when the border was completely wide open. It was ridiculous. It was like nobody was managing it. And again, that was my opinion. I looked at it and I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen
By the way,
anything
most
like that.
Americans agree. So a
It,
majority of Americans agree with you.
yeah, I was shocked at it, and it appeared to be, who's managing the store? Nobody. So it was a situation very concerning. I hope, that politically we can get to some common ground where it isn't all this name calling. It drives me nuts, and it's both sides now, and it makes me crazy. I hope, and this, that it isn't so balkanized even in our news media. It's, you've got Democratic Party news media, you have Republican Party news media, but there doesn't seem to be any truly, straight up news media. That's another thing that drives me crazy. I know when you talk to the public, everybody goes to their tribal camp, right? And it would be nice just to get some reporter not to put in their own bias or opinion into the headline or story right away. So he's driving in a certain direction where he's just reporting on what's going on. That would be great. Let's
Well,
get there.
grievance sells. Yeah.
I get it. Grievance does sell.
Yeah. I'm not
Everybody wants.
justifying it. I'm just explaining. So
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It does give them the ratings,
yeah.
and it should get you where you want to go. But those are all things that, with your background and your business, is you're out there polling it, taking the pulse of the country at all times. And it's such a valuable resource. And hopefully, in closing, I'd like to say, hopefully our leaders are listening to those polls and are paying attention to where things really need to go, and we can get middle ground compromise. And that's what I'm hoping for in our country for the future.
Well, same here. I'll just sort of double down and ditto that.
Thank you so much, Cliff, for being with us today. Again, this was Cliff Young. It's from Ipsos. We have He has spoken many times at the IPPFA conference. He's got a regular podcasting that he does, and you can watch him on LinkedIn for all the many podcasts he does. Great information, and also his book. If you're interested in where the world's at and you want to understand it, what's going on in the United States, purchase Nativism. And thank you so much for your time, Cliff.
Thank you so much.